The late afternoon sun poured a warm, golden light over the quiet California neighborhood, giving everything a gentle, almost cinematic glow. Birds fluttered from branch to branch, their wings cutting through the silence like soft whispers. Inside a modest yet elegant home, SundarPichai stood by the large glass window, his hands folded thoughtfully behind his back. He had spent years in boardrooms and under the glare of cameras, but something about this evening made his heart beat just a little faster. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, the kind that comes when two worlds are about to meet in an unexpected way. For the first time in years, this wasn't about a keynote, a product launch, or a strategy meeting. It was personal, and that made it even more meaningful. Earlier that week, Sundar had received a simple message through official channels. India's External Affairs Minister, Dr. S. Jaishankar, would be visiting the United States for a series of meetings and had expressed a wish to stop by Sundar's home. It wasn't a formal diplomatic event. It wasn't scheduled for cameras or press conferences. It was a gesture, an act of warmth and mutual respect. Sundar had agreed immediately, but the reality of the visit began to sink in as the day approached. For someone who had grown up in a small house in Chennai, with a father who worked for a British conglomerate and a mother who was a stenographer, the idea that one of India's top diplomats would sit in his living room with his family was overwhelming. He wasn't nervous in the way he used to be before big presentations, but there was a deep emotional current running beneath his calm exterior. His wife, Anjali, was bustling quietly in the kitchen, arranging plates of snacks and brewing masala chai. She had chosen to keep things simple and authentic, just like the way they used to host friends back in their college days. Their two children, both teenagers, had been told about the visit in the morning. They didn't fully understand the weight of the occasion, but they sensed from their father's tone that this was special. They helped clean the living room meticulously, fluffing the cushions and straightening the books on the shelves. The house smelled of cardamom and fresh flowers, a combination that carried a sense of both home and heritage. As the clock edged closer to 6 in the evening, a small motorcade approached the driveway. Sundar inhaled deeply. It wasn't just a visit, it was as if time had looped back on itself, connecting the narrow streets of his childhood to the quiet suburban roads of his present life. When the doorbell finally rang, there was a silence in the house that felt almost sacred. Sundar walked slowly toward the door, opened it, and there stood Dr. Jaishankar, impeccably dressed yet exuding a warmth that immediately put everyone at ease. He smiled broadly, extending his hand. Sundar stepped forward, clasping it with genuine respect. For a moment, the two men just looked at each other, as if acknowledging not just their current roles but the long journeys that had brought them here. They moved inside, and the atmosphere softened quickly. There were no podiums or microphones, only soft conversation, laughter, and stories. Dr. Jaishankar asked about Sundar's parents, about his journey from Kharagpur to Stanford, and about the cultural values he carried into his leadership. Sundar spoke with humility, never glorifying his achievements, always circling back to the teachers who guided him, the small sacrifices his parents made, and the communities that supported him when he had nothing but ambition and curiosity. His children listened more intently than they ever had before, realizing in real time the depth of their father's story. But as the conversation flowed, there was an undercurrent that Sundar couldn't quite ignore. He had received an email earlier in the day, short, cryptic, and unsigned. It read, "Not everyone is happy about this meeting. Be careful." He had dismissed it at first, assuming it was just noise. But as he watched the motorcade from the window earlier, he had noticed something that made his chest tighten. A black car parked just a little too far from the others, its windows tinted darker than usual. He told himself not to overthink it. This was America. His neighborhood was safe, and this was a diplomatic visit with security protocols in place. But still, the unease lingered, hiding beneath the surface like a quiet shadow. As they moved to the dining table, where Anjali had laid out a spread of homemade dishes, Dr. Jaishankar shared a story from his own days abroad, about visiting Indian students in small apartments and seeing the same spark of ambition that had once driven Sundar. There was laughter, nods of understanding, and a few quiet moments where emotions brushed close to the surface. The minister's visit wasn't about politics. It was about shared values, identity, and pride. Sundar could feel something shifting within him, a reminder of where he came from and what truly mattered beyond quarterly reports and corporate strategies. Suddenly, just as one of the children was about to bring out a dessert, there was a subtle knock on the back door. It was so faint that at first no one reacted. Then it came again, slightly louder. Sundar's brow furrowed. No one ever used the back door. His security detail was outside, but something about the timing made the room fall silent. Dr. Jaishankar's security team immediately exchanged quick, practiced glances. One of them moved discreetly toward the kitchen. Sundar's heart picked up its pace. The warm atmosphere was still intact on the surface, but beneath it, a thread of tension had begun to tighten. He excused himself politely and walked toward the back hallway, his footsteps echoing softly on the hardwood floor. The knock came a third time, slow and deliberate. He reached for the door handle, his mind replaying the words of the email. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Outside, the sun had finally set, and a dim light from the backyard lanterns cast long, uneven shadows across the lawn. He opened the door halfway, and what he saw made him freeze. Standing there was a young man, no older than 25, dressed in a simple black jacket. His face was anxious, his hands empty and raised slightly, as if trying to show he meant no harm. But it was his eyes that caught Sundar's attention. They were filled with urgency, almost pleading. The man spoke softly. "Sir, I'm sorry, but I need to warn you." Before Sundar could respond, two security officers appeared behind him, their hands instinctively reaching for their earpieces. The young man took a step back, glancing nervously over his shoulder at the dark street beyond. "They're coming," he whispered, his voice trembling. Inside the dining room, laughter had paused. Outside, night had fully taken over, and in that suspended moment between warmth and uncertainty, Sundar realized that this evening was about to turn into something far more than a simple visit. It was the beginning of a night that would test his values, his instincts, and the quiet strength he had carried from his childhood streets to the heart of Silicon Valley. The night had settled over the neighborhood like a heavy velvet curtain, silent but charged with invisible electricity. Sundar stood frozen at the back door, his fingers still curled around the cold metal handle as the young man's words echoed in his mind. "They're coming." The phrase wasn't loud, but it landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of unease through every corner of his thoughts. The security officers moved forward quickly, forming a barrier between Sundar and the stranger, but Sundar raised his hand slightly to stop them. There was something in the young man's expression, fear mixed with sincerity, that made him pause. He wasn't a threat. He looked more like someone caught in the middle of something much larger than himself, desperate to be heard before it was too late. The security team questioned him in low, firm tones, but the young man's answers came in fragmented whispers. He said his name was Arjun. He worked at a local delivery service and had overheard a conversation earlier that afternoon. He spoke of unfamiliar voices, foreign accents, and vague mentions of making a statement tonight. At first, he hadn't understood what it meant. But when he recognized the address mentioned in that conversation, he felt compelled to come. His hands trembled as he spoke, and every few seconds he looked back toward the street, as if expecting someone to appear from the shadows. Sundar could sense his fear wasn't exaggerated. It was raw and real, the kind that came from someone who had accidentally glimpsed something dangerous. Inside the house, the atmosphere shifted subtly but unmistakably. Anjali noticed the way Sundar's expression had hardened, the way his usual gentle calmness had been replaced by a quiet, calculating focus. She ushered the children upstairs under the pretense of showing them something, her instincts as a mother kicking in without needing an explanation. Dr. Jaishankar's security team moved with smooth efficiency, discreetly positioning themselves near entrances and scanning the perimeter through communication devices. The laughter that had filled the room moments earlier was replaced by a charged silence, like the brief pause before a storm breaks. Sundar guided Arjun inside, away from the exposed doorway. They sat in the hallway, dimly lit by a soft wall lamp. Sundar asked him to recount everything again, slowly and clearly this time. Arjun took a shaky breath and began. He had been on his usual delivery route near a storage facility on the outskirts of town when he noticed two unfamiliar men talking near a van. He wasn't supposed to be there. He had taken a shortcut to save time. He had leaned against a wall, unnoticed, and heard fragments of their conversation. There was talk of a high-profile visitor, of a location in a quiet neighborhood, and of timing that matched the minister's schedule. It was vague, but the intent was unmistakable. Something was planned. Something that didn't sound good. As Sundar listened, a strange calm washed over him. It wasn't that he wasn't afraid. Deep down, his heart was beating faster than usual. But he had spent his entire life navigating challenges that seemed larger than himself. From standing out in competitive classrooms in India to leading one of the biggest companies in the world, he had learned that panic never solved anything. Clarity did. And in this moment, he needed clarity more than ever. He glanced toward the living room where Dr. Jaishankar was still seated, composed but clearly aware that the situation had changed. There was a silent understanding between them, a shared recognition of how swiftly ordinary moments could turn extraordinary. Outside, security teams quietly expanded their perimeter. Lights along the driveway were dimmed to reduce visibility from the street. Vehicles were repositioned to block potential access points. Neighbors remained blissfully unaware, their televisions flickering behind drawn curtains, unaware that just a few houses away, a high-stakes situation was unfolding quietly in the dark. Arjun's story took an unexpected turn when he mentioned a detail almost as an afterthought. One of the men had been wearing a jacket with a distinctive logo, a faded emblem of a defunct local security company that had been shut down 2 years ago. It was a strange detail, but it stuck in Sundar's mind. It wasn't random. Whoever these people were, they had planned their movements carefully enough to mask their identity behind old, untraceable symbols. It wasn't the work of amateurs looking for attention. It felt more calculated, more deliberate. As the clock ticked toward 8, the quiet of the neighborhood grew heavier. Sundar gathered everyone in the living room. Dr. Jaishankar listened intently as Sundar explained what Arjun had shared. The minister's demeanor remained composed, but his eyes narrowed thoughtfully. This wasn't his first time in a tense situation. He spoke to his team in hushed tones, issuing clear, precise instructions. Extra patrols were called in. Communication lines were opened with local law enforcement. The visit that was meant to be a simple gesture of warmth had turned into a silent test of preparedness and trust. Amid all this, Sundar's children peered from the top of the staircase, sensing that something unusual was happening. Anjali gently guided them back to their rooms, assuring them that everything was fine. But deep down, she too felt the weight of uncertainty pressing against the walls of their home. She caught Sundar's gaze for a moment, and in that single look, they exchanged 1,000 unspoken words. No matter what happened, they would face it together. As the night deepened, the sound of distant traffic faded, replaced by the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Then, without warning, the lights in the house flickered. Just once, brief, almost imperceptible, but enough to make every security officer glance at one another. Sundar's heartbeat quickened. Moments later, the lights flickered again, this time longer, dipping the house into brief darkness before humming back to life. Arjun's eyes widened. "That's how they signaled," he whispered. "They talked about cutting the power before moving." And just like that, the calm evening turned into a moment of quiet dread. Sundar knew that whatever was coming wasn't far away anymore. The warm gathering that began with stories and chai was now on the edge of something no one in that room had anticipated. And as he looked through the darkened window toward the silent street, he had the unsettling feeling that the night was only beginning to reveal its secrets. The faint hum of the house's electrical system returned after the second flicker, but the silence that followed was different now, thicker, more aware. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant rustle outside carried a new weight. Sundar stood by the window, his eyes scanning the quiet street beyond the glass. The neighborhood, usually peaceful at this hour, felt unfamiliar, like a familiar melody suddenly played in a minor key. Somewhere out there, unseen figures were moving with purpose, and time was running out to understand their intentions. The young man, Arjun, sat nervously on the edge of a chair, his hands clasped together, glancing toward the door as if expecting something to happen at any moment. His warning had turned what was supposed to be a warm evening into a tense waiting game. Dr. Jaishankar's security team moved like shadows, quiet and disciplined. One officer checked the circuit breakers while another coordinated discreetly with local authorities. Reinforcements were on their way, but it would take time, and the unknown group outside seemed to have calculated their moves well. Sundar wasn't trained for situations like this, but his mind worked in patterns, always searching for structure in chaos. He found himself analyzing every detail. The flickering lights, the strange car parked earlier, the timing of the knock at the door. Each piece hinted at something larger, but the full picture was still hidden in the dark. He walked to the kitchen, where Anjali was standing near the counter, her hands pressed against the cool marble. She had always been his anchor, calm in the face of uncertainty. Their eyes met, and though neither spoke, their silence was full of shared understanding. This wasn't a boardroom crisis or a technical failure. This was their home, their children upstairs, and an unpredictable situation unfolding just beyond their walls. Sundar placed a hand on hers gently. She gave a small nod, steadying herself. Whatever was about to happen, they would stand together. Suddenly, a low, distant sound broke through the stillness. The faint, rhythmic crunch of footsteps on gravel. It was subtle, almost careful, but in the quiet night, it was unmistakable. One of the security officers signaled to another, and within seconds, they moved toward the back of the house, communicating through hand gestures and quiet radios. Sundar's heartbeat quickened. He wasn't a man who frightened easily, but there was something deeply unsettling about not knowing who or what was approaching. Arjun leaned forward, whispering, "This is how they moved near the storage lot, too." Slowly, like they didn't want to be noticed until it was too late. His voice trembled, not out of weakness, but because he had already witnessed the start of this unfolding story once. Sundar nodded, appreciating the young man's honesty. There was no time for doubt. Dr. Jaishankar remained composed, his presence steady like a lighthouse in the middle of a dark sea. He had seen enough unpredictable moments in his diplomatic career to know that calm leadership could change outcomes. He spoke quietly to Sundar, his tone both reassuring and deliberate. Situations like this often depend on how clearly we think. Panic feeds chaos. Clarity creates options. Sundar absorbed those words. He had given advice like this to teams facing global challenges, but hearing it in his own living room under such tense circumstances gave it new weight. As the footsteps grew closer, a sudden metallic clang echoed from the side of the house, the sound of something being moved or shifted near the fence. One of the outdoor lights cut out completely, plunging that corner of the yard into darkness. Security teams adjusted their positions, focusing their attention on the darkened area. Sundar felt his throat tighten slightly. The unknown was no longer at a distance. It was at the edge of their home. Then, something unexpected happened. Through the darkness, a single voice called out, not aggressive, not shouting, but calm and measured. "We don't want trouble," the voice said. It was male, older, with a slight accent that Sundar couldn't immediately place. "But we need to talk to the minister, quietly, without the cameras, without anyone else knowing." The request was strange, almost too composed for people who had chosen such an unsettling way to approach. The security team took defensive positions, ready for any sudden movement, but Sundar's mind raced. If this were a simple threat, they would have acted differently. This was something more complicated, layered with intent. He stepped closer to Dr. Jaishankar, who listened intently to the voice outside. The minister's eyes narrowed slightly, deep in thought. Seconds later, the man outside spoke again, this time a little closer. "We know who is inside. We know this is not just a visit. This moment matters more than you realize." The words were cryptic, but there was a strange confidence behind them, as if the speaker believed he held a truth no one else did. The situation had taken another unexpected turn. This wasn't a random group or a reckless act. It felt deliberate, almost orchestrated. Sundar exchanged a look with Dr. Jaishankar, who gave a slight nod. Both men understood something important without saying it out loud. Whatever conversation was waiting outside had the potential to change the course of the night entirely. One of the officers quietly suggested waiting for backup before responding. But Sundar, remembering how this visit began with warmth, respect, and shared heritage, felt a quiet conviction rising in him. He had built his life on listening carefully before acting, and though danger lurked in the shadows, there was a chance, however small, that understanding the motive could prevent a bigger disaster. As the security lights along the driveway flickered one more time, Sundar stepped forward toward the back door. The night air was cool and the silence was thick. Behind him, his family waited in tense stillness. Ahead of him, the darkness held strangers with unknown intentions. And in that fragile space between uncertainty and decision, Sundar took a slow breath. The next step he took would decide whether this night turned into confrontation or revelation. The night air met Sundar with a cool stillness that carried a strange weight, as if the entire neighborhood had unknowingly paused to watch what would happen next. The garden lights cast soft, uneven patches of illumination, revealing fragments of the scene, but never the whole. The distant figure near the fence was still cloaked in darkness, his voice now silent, leaving only the whisper of leaves swaying in the breeze. Sundar stood just inside the doorway, flanked discreetly by two security officers, his mind balancing between instinct and reason. He wasn't a negotiator, but his life had been defined by listening deeply, finding patterns in uncertainty, and building bridges where others saw walls. This was different, yet somehow familiar in its quiet intensity. Behind him, inside the house, Dr. Jaishankar remained seated near the living room table, his eyes steady, observing every movement through the glass panels. His years of diplomatic service had trained him to sense intentions hidden beneath carefully chosen words. He leaned slightly forward, signaling to one of his team members to keep their communication open. Outside, Sundar spoke clearly but calmly, his voice steady despite the pulse of adrenaline coursing through him. "You said you don't want trouble," he began, his words cutting through the quiet like a steady beam of light. "Then explain why you came like this. Who are you, and what do you want?" For a moment there was no reply, only the soft chirping of crickets. Then the same male voice responded, measured but firm. "We came this way because we couldn't trust the usual paths." Too many eyes. Too many ears. What we carry is not for the media, not for officials who'll turn it into headlines. It's for him, the man said, his voice lifting slightly on the last word, referring unmistakably to the minister inside. The ambiguity of his statement made the tension rise. The security teams subtly repositioned themselves, one officer edging toward the perimeter, another near the side gate. Sundar felt the weight of the moment pressing on his shoulders. It wasn't just about safety anymore, it was about understanding the motive. Were these people informants, protesters, or something else entirely? Then, slowly, three figures emerged from the darkness. They didn't storm forward or make sudden movements. They walked with deliberate calm, their hands visible, each step cautious but purposeful. Two men and one woman, all dressed in plain clothes that made them blend into the night rather than stand out. Their faces were tense but not aggressive. The older man, who had spoken earlier, carried a worn leather folder tucked under his arm. His hair was streaked with gray, and his eyes held a kind of weary determination. Arjun, who had been quietly watching from the hallway, gasped softly when he saw them. "That's them," he whispered to one of the officers. They were near the van. "That's the same jacket logo on the second man." The officer relayed the information instantly to the security lead. The situation was no longer speculative. It had a face, a shape, and an undeniable reality. The older man raised his hand slightly as he stopped a few meters from the doorway. "We're not here to harm anyone," he said, his voice calm but carrying urgency. "We tried every official channel, every request, but no one listened. We knew the minister would be here tonight. This is our only chance." His words hung in the air, stirring questions that no one had yet dared to ask. Inside the house, the children peeked from the top of the staircase again, their wide eyes reflecting the dim light. Anjali held them back gently, whispering for them to stay quiet. Though her face remained composed, her grip on the railing betrayed her unease. This was their home, and strangers stood just beyond their doorway with unknown intentions. Dr. Jaishankar slowly stood and approached the doorway, stopping just behind Sundar. His presence shifted the energy in the air. The older man outside straightened slightly when he saw him, as if a long-awaited moment had arrived. "We have documents," he said, holding up the folder. "Proof of something that's been buried for too long." What happens tonight could affect millions. Not just here. The minister's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, but in deep consideration. He had encountered unexpected revelations in many corners of the world, sometimes in formal meetings, sometimes whispered in back alleys. He knew sincerity often wore no uniform. With a nod, he gestured for one of his security officers to carefully retrieve the folder. The man handed it over without resistance. As the officer opened the folder under the porch light, Sundar glimpsed the first few pages. They were filled with handwritten notes, official-looking stamps, and old photographs clipped to reports. The content was dense, but one thing stood out immediately: a series of maps and letters mentioning a large technology contract connected to rural infrastructure in India. Sundar's eyebrows furrowed slightly. This wasn't what he had expected. It wasn't a personal threat. It was information. The older man spoke again, his voice steady despite the situation. "We worked on this project years ago. It was supposed to bring affordable connectivity to thousands of remote villages. But the plans were hijacked, redirected, and buried. The truth disappeared under layers of bureaucracy and greed. We've been trying to get someone to listen ever since. Tonight we came here because he's the only one left who might still care." He looked directly at the minister as he spoke, his expression pleading but dignified. The weight of his words settled heavily on the quiet night. Sundar glanced at Dr. Jaishankar, who remained still, absorbing everything with the quiet gravity of someone who understood that moments like this could alter narratives far beyond one evening. But just as the minister began to speak, a sharp crack echoed from the far side of the property, like wood snapping or a gate forced open. Security teams reacted instantly, voices murmuring through radios, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The three visitors flinched but didn't move, their hands still visible. Sundar's heart jumped. Whatever fragile balance had been established was now teetering again. Someone else was out there. And this time, it didn't sound like they had come to talk. The quiet evening that had turned into an unexpected revelation was now heading toward an unpredictable climax. The documents held truths that demanded attention, but outside, in the darkness, a new and unseen presence was making its move. The sudden crack from the far side of the property shattered the fragile stillness like glass breaking in a silent room. The security team's reaction was immediate and precise. Flashlights beamed into the dark edges of the yard, radios crackled with low, urgent voices, and two officers sprinted toward the source of the sound. Sundar's breath caught as he stepped instinctively in front of his family, his protective instinct overriding every other thought. Dr. Jaishankar moved forward with quiet authority, signaling his team to lock down every possible entry point. The three unexpected visitors, who moments earlier had been sharing revelations, now stood frozen, their expressions a mix of fear and defiance, as if they, too, were realizing that their plan to deliver information had collided with forces far beyond their control. The porch lights trembled as if in sympathy with the tension hanging in the air. The older man clutched his folder tighter, his knuckles pale. "We didn't bring anyone else," he said, his voice cracking slightly now. "Whoever that is, they're not with us." His words rang true, his fear genuine. Sundar's analytical mind picked up on the details, the slight widening of his pupils, the quick glance toward the darkness. These were not the movements of a man hiding an accomplice. These were the reflexes of someone caught off guard. From the shadows near the fence, faint movements appeared, shapes gliding just beyond the edges of light. They didn't speak, didn't reveal themselves. The security team fanned out, but the intruders seemed to anticipate their movements, staying just far enough to remain unseen. It wasn't random. Whoever was out there understood the layout, the timing, even the lighting. Sundar felt a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't just coincidence. Someone else had been watching the house long before tonight began. Inside, Anjali ushered the children into a safe room upstairs, her voice calm but firm, masking her own fear with the steadiness of a mother who knew panic would only make things worse. She locked the door behind them, whispering soft reassurances while keeping her ear pressed to the hallway, listening to the distant commands of the security team downstairs. The house, which had always been a place of warmth and laughter, now felt like a stage where multiple stories were colliding, some spoken, some still hidden in the shadows. Dr. Jaishankar's demeanor shifted from composed to razor-sharp. His diplomatic instincts were now paired with a lifetime of reading complex situations. He turned to the older man and asked in a low voice, "Who else knows about what you brought tonight?" The man hesitated, then admitted, "Very few," but there were whispers. "Someone may have followed us. They've tried to silence us before." His words sent a ripple of unease through everyone present. A loud metallic clatter interrupted their exchange. The side gate had been forced open. The security lights along the perimeter cut out one by one, plunging parts of the yard into darkness. It was deliberate, controlled. Sundar's mind raced through possibilities. Local criminals, a targeted operation, or perhaps individuals connected to the buried project the visitors had exposed. Whatever it was, they were organized. The minister's team took control of the situation with swift precision. 2 officers positioned themselves near the back entrance while another secured the front. Sundar stood beside Dr. Jaishankar, their eyes meeting in a silent understanding. This night, which had started with cultural warmth and mutual respect, had now become something much larger than both of them. A collision between truth, secrecy, and unexpected danger. Arjun, who had been watching everything unfold with a mixture of fear and awe, suddenly spoke up. "The van," he whispered urgently. "The van they used earlier, it was parked near the storage facility. It wasn't just a meeting spot. They were loading something. I saw a crate." His sudden recollection drew the attention of the minister and the security team. "What kind of crate?" one officer asked. Arjun shook his head. "I don't know, but it looked heavy. They covered it quickly when they noticed me." Those words changed everything. If whoever was outside now was connected to that van, it meant they weren't just eavesdroppers or protesters. They had come with a purpose. Then, like a cue in a well-rehearsed play, the power inside the house went out completely. Every light, every hum of an appliance vanished, leaving the home in complete darkness. The only illumination came from the security team's flashlights and the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the windows. The sudden darkness tightened everyone's chest. Sundar heard his children upstairs cry out softly and his heart clenched. He forced himself to stay calm. Panic here would spread like fire. Dr. Jaishankar's voice was steady in the dark. "They're testing our response," he said quietly. "They want us unsettled before they make their next move." Seconds later, the sound of footsteps came again, but this time from 2 different directions. One near the forced gate, another near the back corner of the house. The security team split into 2 groups, flashlights cutting through the blackness, beams trembling ever so slightly as adrenaline kicked in. Sundar stood rooted but alert, his mind sharper than ever. He wasn't a soldier, but he understood patterns, and something about this felt like more than just a break-in. The older man stepped closer to Sundar and the minister, his voice low. "This project we uncovered, it wasn't just money being redirected. It involved people, powerful people. If they're here, it's to erase everything, including us." His confession sent a cold wave through the room. The folder in his hands, once just paper and ink, now felt like something far more dangerous. Then, faint but unmistakable, came a new sound from outside. A mechanical whirring, like an engine idling softly. Sundar moved closer to the window and caught a glimpse of headlights dimmed to near invisibility. A large vehicle was parked just beyond the tree line, engine running. Whatever was coming wasn't random, and it wasn't over. In the darkness of his own home, Sundar stood beside one of India's most respected diplomats, a group of frightened whistleblowers, a brave but terrified young man, and his own family hidden upstairs. Outside, unseen forces tightened their circle. The night that had begun with shared stories and cultural warmth was now a countdown to something far more dangerous and decisive. And as the first distant rumble of approaching backup vehicles finally echoed faintly down the street, everyone inside knew the next few minutes would change everything. The distant rumble of approaching vehicles reached them like the low growl of an approaching storm, faint but steadily growing louder. Inside the house, every heartbeat seemed to synchronize with that sound, each passing second stretching longer than the last. The power remained cut, the rooms cloaked in thick darkness, broken only by the narrow beams of flashlights moving across walls and floors like nervous fireflies. Sundar stood near the living room window, his silhouette outlined against the faint streetlight filtering through the curtains. His mind, usually consumed by solving technological problems and shaping future visions, was now focused on something primal and immediate, protecting those inside while understanding what the intruders truly wanted. Outside, the mechanical whirring grew clearer. The large vehicle beyond the tree line was no longer idle. It shifted slightly, tires crunching against the gravel as if preparing for something. The security team exchanged rapid, quiet instructions, forming defensive positions near both entrances. Dr. Jaishankar moved calmly but with unmistakable authority, his presence anchoring the room. Years of navigating delicate international crises had taught him to read situations not only by action, but by silence. And there was something deliberate about the way the intruders were moving. They weren't panicking. They were waiting. The older man holding the folder stood near the center of the room now, his hand still clutching the evidence like it was the only thing keeping the truth alive. His voice was low but urgent when he spoke to the minister. "They're not here to steal," he said. "They're here to make sure this story dies here tonight. If they get to us, the project, the villages, the lives tied to it, it will all disappear again." His words carried the weight of years spent fighting a system that refused to listen. Sundar felt their power. This wasn't just about one family's safety anymore. It was about protecting something larger, something that mattered far beyond these walls. A sudden thud on the side door broke the silence. It wasn't a knock. It was forceful, like someone testing the barrier. Two security officers rushed to the source, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like blades. The door held, but the sound was followed by another, closer this time, near the back window. Then, from outside, a voice rose, different from the older man's earlier tone. This voice was cold, authoritative, and laced with quiet menace. "You have something that doesn't belong to you," it said. "Hand it over and no one gets hurt. Resist, and we won't ask again." The demand hung in the air like smoke. Sundar glanced at the minister. Their eyes met, a silent conversation unfolding between them. Giving up the folder might protect the people in the house temporarily, but it would erase the truth forever. Keeping it meant risking confrontation. It wasn't an easy decision, but neither man needed to say the answer aloud. They both knew what had to be done. Outside, flashlights from the approaching backup vehicles appeared at the far end of the street, still distant but growing brighter. The intruders must have noticed, because their movements suddenly became sharper, more aggressive. Another loud bang hit the side door, this time rattling the hinges. One of the windows cracked slightly under pressure. Inside, everyone stiffened. Anjali held the children close upstairs, whispering calming words even as her own pulse raced. Dr. Jaishankar's team took control swiftly, shifting from defensive positions to containment strategies. Two officers moved the whistleblowers, including the older man, toward a safer interior room away from windows. Another set up a secure communication line using backup equipment, bypassing the cut power. Sundar, meanwhile, stayed close to the minister. He wasn't armed, but his steady presence made a difference. Even in the face of danger, his calm had a way of grounding people. Then, something unexpected happened. Arjun, the young man who had delivered the first warning, stepped forward. His voice shook, but his eyes were steady. "I know a way out," he said. Everyone turned toward him. "When I came earlier, I parked my bike down the side alley. There's a narrow path behind the hedges. It leads to the old service road. They don't know it exists. If we move fast, we can get the minister and the folder out before they breach." His idea wasn't perfect, but it was bold. The minister considered it for only a moment before nodding. "Do it," he said simply. The security team quickly reorganized. Two officers would create a diversion at the front entrance, while the minister, Sundar, Arjun, and two others slipped out through the narrow path. The whistleblowers would follow closely, shielded by security. The plan relied on timing, precision, and the hope that the intruders hadn't mapped every corner of the property. As they prepared to move, the intruders made their push. The back window shattered with a sharp crash, sending shards of glass across the floor. Security opened fire, not lethal, but controlled warning shots to hold them back. Outside, flashlights flickered wildly as figures ducked and moved. The vehicle beyond the tree line revved loudly now, its engine a threatening growl. Sundar led the way toward the narrow path with Arjun guiding him. The hedges were dense, almost invisible in the darkness, but Arjun moved confidently. Behind them, the minister followed, his security close, the folder still in the older man's hands. Every step felt stretched, as if the night itself was holding its breath. Shouts echoed from the front as the diversion team engaged, buying precious seconds. When they emerged onto the service road, the distant lights of approaching law enforcement vehicles finally came into full view, washing the dark street in blue and red. It was a surreal moment, between fear and relief. They had made it out, but the night wasn't over. As the convoy of backup vehicles roared toward the house, the intruders realized their window was closing. From behind the hedges, one of them shouted in frustration, but they didn't pursue. Instead, the large vehicle beyond the trees turned sharply, its tires screeching against the gravel before disappearing into the darkness. Whoever they were organized enough to retreat cleanly. Minutes later, the house was surrounded by law enforcement and additional security. The intruders were gone, but the evidence they had tried to silence was safe. Sundar stood under the flashing lights, his shirt slightly damp with sweat, his breath steadying. Dr. Jaishankar placed a hand on his shoulder, a quiet acknowledgement of the courage it had taken to protect not just people, but truth. Inside a secured vehicle, the folder was handed to trusted officials who would ensure it reached the right channels. The older man sat silently, tears welling in his eyes, not out of fear, but relief that after years of being ignored, someone had finally listened. Arjun leaned against his bike, exhausted but proud, his single act of courage having changed the course of the night. As the dawn began to break, the sky shifting from black to pale blue, Sundar looked at his family through the window. They were safe. The minister nodded to him quietly before being escorted away, the evidence now on its way to a place where it could no longer be buried. The night had begun with shared warmth and respect, spiraled into tension and danger, and ended with an unexpected alliance built on courage, truth, and quiet resilience. Sundar knew life would return to its routines soon, but something inside him had changed. Sometimes the most powerful moments happen not in boardrooms or stages, but in the quiet of one's home, when truth knocks in the dark and courage answers.